There you had the introduction of the cluster system, the first MTSF, the National Spatial Development Perspective, the IGR Framework Act, which remains an important piece of legislation, but also guidelines for the provincial growth and development strategies. The third wave is around planning, monitoring, and evaluation at the center of government. So you had the two ministries, the NPC was established, the DPME was then formed from a merger of the two ministries, and then you also had the NTSF for the fifth administration, the very important Spatial Planning and Land Use Management Act, the Framework for Strategic Plans and APPs was developed in the very important 2010, and then the General Responsive Planning and Budgeting Framework that was adopted in 2019. And these all remain important components. The current wave is about also and these all remain MTSF components for the current wave. Current administration is about the prioritization of the spatial transformation in the planning system. We know that these all remain. The National Spatial Development Framework has also been adopted. For the first time, you had in the MTSF, the current MTSF, the mainstreaming of priorities relating to women, youth, and persons with disabilities. Formally within the MTSF, you had the revised framework for strategic plans and APPs that was introduced based on an evaluation of the previous framework. Collaborative planning with non-governmental role players is also put on the agenda, and then a strong affirmation of the results-based approach to planning, budgeting, monitoring, evaluation. What are some of the challenges that persist? Firstly, we find that planning instruments, including when you look at APPs of departments, do not sufficiently prioritize policy interventions and development goals, including the NDP and the MTSF, and translate these then into measurable outputs, outcomes, and impacts. There's insufficient evidence-based planning, although there is certainly some evidence-based planning, but it's insufficient. The planning system remains fragmented. There's a lack of coherent planning policy and legislation to harmonize the planning system, and that we are seeking to address. There's also a lack of alignment with regard to the manner in which the state-owned enterprises undertake planning, inadequate collaboration between center of government departments on planning and budgeting. So even though there is good collaboration between DPME, DPSA, the Presidency, National Treasury, and DCOG, that certainly can be strengthened, as well as with the Premier's offices and at a local government level. There's also, we find a dominance of the compliance-based approach, which tends to crowd out the performance and the results-based approach. Why is integrated planning important? It will assist government in ensuring that the policies and frameworks are coherent and coordinated to work together to deliver on government priorities, to improve synergies and eliminate duplication, harnessing multiple efforts and resources towards optimizing results. And this is applicable. So it's important that there should be both harmonization whilst allowing for customization and prioritization at a sector, provincial, local, and program level. Integrated planning is also critical in supporting strategic decision-making by providing a comprehensive view of resources and commitments, including ensuring the alignment of financial resources and budgets with government priorities, ensuring that functions are coordinated, being more collaborative, enabling processes which are harmonized, coordinated, and consistent, and also being strategic. This is a picture of the integrated national planning system. As I said, it looks at short, medium, and long-term planning, and as well as, and you'll see that is the horizontal axis, and then national, provincial, and local planning being the vertical axis. And then, of course, spatial planning is a very critical role, and the need to integrate spatial planning within the broader planning system. And then, of course, non-state sector planning also being integrated. And then, of course, on the right, we have the district development model, which seeks to integrate all of government and all of society within a particular locality. This is also just another depiction of the planning system, which focuses on the importance of implementation synergies, improving development results, and quite clearly, even though we're not going into this now, the translation of plans into operational plans, program plans, proper development of programs, program planning and implementation, and of course, project planning. This is also a depiction of how integrated planning should lead to improved integrated implementation, improved service delivery, and improved development results and outcomes. The aims of the policy framework are to promote improved integration and harmonization of planning across the planning system, to improve coherence of policies, frameworks, and legislation, and therefore to enhance the achievement of delivery. We've also looked at what are the key functions of planning at the center of government, because that's also part of our government model and many government models across the world. So you'll have the planning cycle and 5-year development plans. Many countries have both long-term plans as well as 5-year plans and even annual planning, but also the capacity to diagnose development challenges and set priorities, policy coordination, design and implementation, and alignment of line ministries with central planning instruments. So that is critical for the center of government to then not only coordinate planning, but also to improve the alignment of the line ministries with those central planning instruments. Then also important is strategic development planning, including integration of spatial planning in national strategic planning, monitoring implementation and progress, stakeholder management and accountability, including state and non-state actors. We then just also looked at some international benchmarking, and these case studies are available in the main policy document. In terms of Canada, the ability to build alliances, form partnerships, and effectively manage horizontal initiatives. Malaysia, including both a top-down and bottom-up approach, including stakeholder buy-in and ownership, with deep consultations within and beyond government. And we've seen that Malaysia has also influenced some of our programs, such as the Deliverology, Operation Pakisa, and even to some extent Operation Vulindlela. China, where China also has a long-term plan, a 5-year plan, as well as annual plans, and they focused on a lot on resolving conflicts stemming from plans applied to the same space, being drawn up independently of each other, which is also part of the mission of the district development model and the related one plans. Rwanda has the Joint Action Development Forums, bringing all stakeholders together for the delivery of the national strategy, as well as through district development strategies. Kenya, regional integrated plans for programs and projects, as well as county integrated development plans. And then Uganda, coordination across government in order to strengthen results-based planning and implementation. So we see a lot of common themes in terms of the approach to planning in different countries. Now, this sets out the problem tree, the analysis of what exactly is the problem in the planning system. This is a high-level depiction. The problem chain and the causal theories within this are a lot more complex than is depicted here. But this shows how the problem tree then contributes towards suboptimal development results. So starting with uncoordinated and inadequate legislation and policy, which you would to drive an organized integrated planning system, inadequate integration of development priorities within planning instruments, inadequate capability to undertake planning, and that then impedes the government machinery from effectively planning for integrated development results. And then the core problem is the inadequate integration in the planning system in a manner which ensures policy coherence and optimizes implementation and results. I'm not going to read through everything because the members do have this available to them. Now, in order to address that problem tree, this is the posited theory of change to improve the manner in which the planning system contributes towards improving development outcomes. So firstly, legislative reform. There is certain legislation that already influences planning or guides planning, but it's inadequate. But then also integrated planning instruments to be responsive to development priorities across government. And there's a lot of work underway in that regard, which I can return to, but also ensuring an enabling environment for undertaking development and institutional planning. That should then lead to adequate planning legislation, a planning system that enables coherent planning processes and plans, a planning system that has sufficient capabilities. That should then lead to intermediate outcomes around an integrating planning system that functions across the three spheres of government, includes non-governmental stakeholders, which in turn leads to an aligned, coherent, and integrated implementation of the short, medium, and long-term plans by government and society. And that should in turn lead to improved development outcomes. Now, these are then the policy recommendations, the legislative reforms, and the chairperson has already spoken about the Integrated Development Planning Framework Bill, which will be consulted on in the current year. And then there's a various policy statements around the different aspects of planning. Firstly, that long-term national development plans should be reviewed and revised every 10 years, and based on extensive research and consultation across the three spheres of government and with social partners. So we currently have the NDP 2030, which was developed in 2011, adopted in 2012. And I think the suggestion is that we should already be starting to develop the next long-term national development plan, noting that there are considerable changes in the environment that can then build on the NDP review. Secondly, the National Medium-Term Plan is developed every 5 years for a particular government term of office and is based on the electoral mandate, but also to give effect to the long-term development plan. Thirdly, the budget prioritization framework is developed on an annual basis to identify the policy and planning priorities for the forthcoming year and to guide resource allocations in line with short, medium, and long-term priorities and results. Fourthly, the National Annual Strategic Plan is developed on an annual basis to give expression to the priorities and targets of government for a particular year, but also to then guide the development of APPs. Fifth recommendation is that the approved long and medium-term plans are institutionalized by the three spheres of government, including through the strategic plans and APPs. The sixth recommendation is that the National Spatial Development Framework should be revised every 5 years in alignment with the long-term National Development Plan and should be implemented and institutionalized across the three spheres of government. It should be noted that this is already a provision in SPLUMA, so we've made sure that this is aligned with the policy framework. Provincial governments will also develop long and medium-term plans aligned with the national long-term and medium-term plans, whilst obviously taking into account provincial priorities and mandates. Institutional strategic plans and APPs should be results-based and aligned to the medium and long-term plans in accordance with the revised framework for strategic plans and APPs, but should also provide geospatial referencing for the location of interventions at a local level. And this is also very important. This spatialization of planning is also very important in the context of the development of the one plans and the district development model. National sector and cluster plans should also be aligned to the medium and long-term development plan. So, for example, the National Infrastructure Plan should both take into account the NDP, the National Spatial Development Framework, so that we don't have different plans pulling in different directions. And then, of course, the DDM1 plans and the IDPs are aligned to the medium and long-term plans at a provincial and national level. And the revised framework for corporate planning and stakeholder compacts aligned to the government's results-based planning principles and methodologies should also be developed to guide planning by state-owned enterprises. Currently, we find that state-owned enterprises, there's inadequate alignment, and this is a long-standing issue with the overall national and even provincial and local priorities. And then national, provincial, and local government planning frameworks and guidelines should make provision for collaboration with non-governmental stakeholders in the development and institutional planning processes across the three spheres of government. We then look at recommendations relating to the enabling environment. Firstly, the professionalization of planning and to improve the institutionalization and integration of short, medium, and long-term planning priorities. And we'll see also that the framework on the professionalization of the public service, which was developed through NSG, also focuses on the professionalization of planning. The issue of a knowledge hub to inform evidence-based planning is very critical, that we also use new techniques in the government planning system, including things such as foresighting, scenario planning, anticipatory governance, and so on. And even, modeling is also important in that context. The fourth one is around evidence-based and results-based planning and budgeting should be mandatory and capacitated across the three spheres of government. So we engaged quite a lot with National Treasury in the budget process, and that issue of looking at budget allocations versus the historical but also the projected results to be achieved through those budgets is quite critical. Also, the importance of using technology and innovation to strengthen and automate the planning system, including enabling better linkages across short, medium, and long-term instruments. The appropriate institutional arrangements across the three spheres of government should be institutionalized, and we know that some of those do exist, including planning forums, and where appropriate, social partners should be included in the planning forums. Capacity building programs on planning are also important, including in collaboration with education institutions and professional bodies. DPME, in consultation with other centre of government departments, would issue an annual planning and budgeting cycle for a particular financial year. DPME also, in consultation with other departments, should issue a compendium of common definitions across the three spheres. This slide just outlines some of the consultations that have taken place around the policy framework. The process started as far back as 2021, where we focused with the Centre of Government, the Presidency, some bilateral engagements with particular sector departments. We also have the National Technical Planning Forum, which includes planning officials, a couple of hundred planning officials across the national sphere, public entities. And then we also have the National Steering Committee for Integrated Planning, which includes the offices of the Premier, as well as the National Centre of Government Departments, DPME, Treasury, DCOG, and so on, and DPSA, as well as SALGA. And that has been an important forum for consultation and engagement. We did also have a webinar with non-governmental stakeholders. And then, of course, the cluster system, GISCID, we presented to the co-chairs of the ministerial clusters. And as we also then finally went to the GISCID Cabinet Committee, and the approval by Cabinet was granted on the 21st of September. That's the end of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Sorry for that. Is that the end of the presentation?
That's the end, Honourable Chair.
Thank you. I had just a short pressure break. That's why there was a... Can I now give honourable members opportunity to ask questions? I see Honourable Kibi's hand. I see Honourable Mbele. Honourable Kibi, you can start.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Good morning, Chair. Good morning to the honourable members, colleagues. Honourable Chair, I want to welcome and appreciate the presentation by DPME. Honourable Chair, my question would be, are the offices of the Premier well capacitated to drive planning, monitoring, and evaluation on the implementation of what is required in the planning cycle, including alignments of plans and resources? And my next one, the move towards digitized and analytical framework has to be fully supported in order to assess plans across spheres of government. The next one is, does the department have powers to ensure evidence-based and results-based planning and budgeting across the three spheres of government? And Honourable Chair, my next question would be, on slide 3, the department made mention that framework seeks to build on existing progress in the planning system to address gaps. Could the department elaborate existing gaps in the planning system which led to the development of policy framework? Also, having mentioned that the purpose of the policy framework is to strengthen integrated planning towards achievement of the country's development goals, is the policy framework adopted by the Cabinet for implementation in the three spheres of government? If yes, are the provinces and municipalities aware of the policy framework? If they are aware, is the policy institutionalized and incorporated in their planning development model? I thank you, Honourable Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Kibi. Honourable Mbele.
I hope I am audible and my connection is clear. And thank you very much for the presentation. Chairperson, if you'll indulge me, I've got a bit of a lengthy intro remarks by way of background, and then I'll get to my two questions. And my opening comments are based on having previously worked in governments, in the provincial governments in the Western Cape. And because I was based in the Premier's office, I had a unique and very valuable insights into the sort of bird's eye view of how the machine works and the different parts interact. And I'm sure the colleagues from DPME, from their own work, will appreciate the complexity of this sort of planning and later monitoring and evaluation processes. If you'll give me just a quick 2 minutes to lay out the three aspects. One, there's complexity in terms of the planning itself, government planning, given that there's mandates derived from different quarters. There's the constitution, legislation, international obligations, the mandates of the governing party based on their manifesto in the last election. And in particular, at local level, you have to take into account inputs from IDP consultations. So a lot of information and sort of interests and demands needs to be brought together. Secondly, there's complexity in terms of process. because priorities and intentions and objectives have to be embedded, as was mentioned in the PowerPoints, firstly in the APP, and then secondly in the department budgets, because if it's not in the APP or the budgets, it doesn't exist. That's the sort of the end of the story. And we have a big problem around unfunded mandates, where it's said on paper that this should be done, but then there's no allocation or inadequate allocation in budgets for it. And then secondly, operational management. If you haven't got the sort of cross-departmental or the cluster working groups to avoid or minimize the silo approach, then that's where things fall through cracks and through gaps. And the one thing I remember I learned working in government is that if it's not on the agenda, it doesn't get done. And it's a small but crucial operational issue that I think might be behind many of the complaints we have as a committee around, you know, the merger of Brand SA and Tourism SA and other such delays where you're trying to get harmonization and cooperation across departments or ministries. And then lastly, there's always the kind of informal aspects of governments. And I'm quite sure the officials in the departments are very familiar with this. You get territoriality between departments. This is my issue, my area, my ground, and you can't touch it. There's informal hierarchies that flow from either outside politics or internal cultures that sort of mitigate or dampen progress on some issues. And then the perennial issue of ingrained, call it bureaucratic inertia and the silo mentalities within the public sector, given the scale and the diversity. So we can't underestimate how complex and difficult and sort of ossified these issues can be sometimes. So I definitely don't envy the colleagues who are trying to provide clarity and to chart the way forward on such issues. So given that background, I'm very skeptical about the idea that we can technocratically manage and construct a system to just make the planning sort of happen and flow, because it'll keep bumping into obstacles, dead ends, bottlenecks, and that sort of thing. So, Chairperson, my first question is, do we not need a paradigm shift? And I wish the minister was here actually, but hopefully the deputy minister can give the strategic high-level inputs, as well as obviously from the officials. Do we not need a paradigm shift that says, given the scale, the complexity of the space and the process, and especially in a country like ours, where there's, I mean, we all know the issues. You can't walk 2 steps without sort of falling into a sort of sinking sand. Should we not be looking at a facilitation approach as governments? So it's about saying, how do we facilitate optimal ecosystems with civic actors, with business, with communities, as opposed to thinking as governments, we can plan, have the objective, make the roadmap, and then drive forward, as opposed to tapping into a more sort of synergistic, dynamic ecosystem that will optimize collaboration and facilitate the best of different players. Because as I was looking at the presentation, as well as the other documents we received, the formal sort of documents, I saw that, just give me a second, please. It was on page 9. It talks about an enabling environment for undertaking developments and planning. And it says that government planning frameworks and guidelines should make provision for collaboration with non-government stakeholders. But it says only collaboration in development and institutional planning. I think the collaboration should be in implementation, in resource mobilization and in actual sort of implementation of efforts on the ground? I'm sorry, that was quite sort of convoluted, but I hope it's clear. My main question is, should the paradigm not be moved from planning to facilitation of ecosystem synergy? That's my first question. My second question, Chair, is I would like to know the sort of thoughts applied and any insights around whether this policy framework does or how it can better complement the Intergovernmental Relations Framework Act. Because, I mean, everyone will be aware where I'm coming from with this, is that in Cape Town, when the SAPS is under-resourced, under-trained, under-equipped, understaffed, and the Metro Police are trying to fill gaps in order for residents to be safer and to have safe streets and safe homes, it does not help when the police minister is condemning and stigmatizing and pushing back against that effort. We should have intergovernmental cooperation, and we should have cooperative governance between spheres, as is mandated by the Constitution. So we can plan, you know, the integrated processes, but it doesn't help when the objective of achieving, in this case, safety and security in communities is then being undermined from a different sphere, rather than seeing how can we come together in order to optimize the best results for everyone. So my question there, just to summarize, is the marriage between this policy framework and the Intergovernmental Relations Framework Act, which itself is underpinned by the constitutional imperative for cooperative governance. I'd like some commentary on that, please. Thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Ntuli.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I welcome the presentation by the department. Safe to say, Honorable Kibi covered me in most of the issues that I've jotted down on gaps in cooperation by the provinces and municipalities. But again, Chair, I wanted to add in terms of the if this policy framework is in complementary of the Intergovernmental Relations Framework Act, to say if that is so, can the department elaborate or expatiate on the angles that are intertwined thus far? Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Mtsipe.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. I've got a question here for DPME. Have you studied or planned thoroughly to introduce this policy framework, since policies are being chopped and changed? And are you sure that this you are introducing will be of help of this department, since you said you are strengthening the country's goals, especially for these 3 spheres of government? As the committee, we appreciate the development that will benefit and be in the best interest of our country. But the question is, what makes this department confident that what you are planning will be effective, corrupt-free, and fully accountabilities before it gets out of hands? Thank you very much, Honorable Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Mtsipe. I now hand over to the department for responses to the question raised thus far.
Honourable Chair, I don't know if Deputy, should I start? I don't know if Deputy Minister, or shall I come in and then Deputy Minister will conclude?
I'm not the leader of the department.
Just go in, Dr. Grisel.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. Let me come in. All right, thank you very much for the comments and the questions. I think it's our thinking is very much aligned. I think the first thing Honourable Kibi asked about whether the Premier's officers are well capacitated to drive planning, monitoring, evaluation. We are of the view that the whole planning system is undercapacitated, and we would include DPME in that. I think also historically there has been an emphasis on monitoring, but there's been insufficient emphasis on planning. And I think, as Honourable Member Mbele also indicated, particularly given the complexity of planning. So, you know, I think there and Premier's officers through the National Steering Committee on Integrated Planning have often raised this with us. So it is something which is on our agenda, that we work with DPSA as well as with the Premier's officers to have a much more scientific examination of the requirements of planning as well, you know, at a provincial level as well, because we feel that it's very, very critical. And also that, you know, this idea, it's iterative. Planning is iterative. It's not something that you do once every 5 years or even once a year, and then you forget about it. On the issue of, so yes, we feel that we need to focus more on building professional planning capacity across government. The issue of digitized framework to assess plans across government, we fully agree with that. And one of our projects is to start looking at the automation of planning, because we feel that we can eliminate a lot of the sort of manual labor around, you know, even something such as an assessment of the alignment of a plan with the NTSF is something that we should be able to automate more effectively, introduce AI and so on. The issue of ensuring evidence-based and results-based planning and budgeting across the spheres. Look, I think if you look at the system of strategic planning and APPs across the whole of national government departments, provincial government departments, public entities that fall under the revised framework, there is quite a lot of evidence-based planning, in that if you look at the requirements, the departments are supposed to do a situation analysis as they undertake their planning on, and that should be done on an annual basis. But we feel that that should be improved. There's a lot more, you know, so departments normally do use Stats SA, they might use other research projects, but we feel that the deepening of the knowledge intensity of the planning process and what goes into the planning can certainly be improved. So the issue of having a much more systematized, organized knowledge hub is something which you know is also part of the recommendation. In terms of results-based planning and budgeting, honourable members would be aware that the results-based management approach and the introduction of an outcomes-based approach has been with us in government for, I would say, at least 10 years. So, but we feel that it hasn't adequately been institutionalized. And part of the reason for that is that departments are, you know, the kind of, they're concerned, for example, if the current system, particularly when it comes to auditing. So a department would rather say that they're going to have a report on the number of jobs created, because they say, look, we have control over the development of a report, but we don't have control over the number of jobs created. So, but we are working with departments, and I think if you look at the standardized indicators that have been developed in some sectors, especially sectors of concurrent competencies, you do find results-based targets. So, for example, Department of Health has very much developed results-based indicators, things like maternal mortality, HIV infections and such, that are then part of the provincial APPs as well as the national APPs. And those are definitely results-based, but in other sectors, other departments, we are still, as part of our analysis of APPs, we are still working with departments to try to encourage them to ensure that there are much more results-based indicators and targets. The issue of results-based budgeting is also something that Treasury has been looking at. So, for example, they would have done some spending reviews, which would precisely be looking at the extent to which the allocated resources and budgets have indeed led to a particular result. So we fully agree that is something that needs to be much more deepened. And then the issue of building on existing progress to address gaps. I think some of the gaps in the planning system, and we had also done a research study, which is a diagnostic on the state of planning at provincial and national level. And that research study also underlined some of the challenges and the gaps. So one of the gaps that we had identified is that when we look at planning instruments, they don't sufficiently prioritize policy interventions and translate the development goals, so both the NDP and the NTSF, into their APPs. So for example, if you would take, let's say you take an APP, the department might have its own priorities, which they would include in their APP, and they wouldn't necessarily include in the APP the priorities that have been adopted by cabinet, that have been part of the MTSF and the NDP. So, but that is improving, particularly us working with departments doing the analysis of APPs and so on. The other gap is around as I was saying earlier, the issue of evidence base. So firstly, the production of the relevant evidence, particularly time series data that can be used in the planning process, but also ensuring that the evidence is well organized, accessible, credible evidence, and so on. And part of that we're working in DPME to say the evaluations that DPME has done. Now, every evaluation includes an improvement plan that would have been in response to the findings and the recommendations of the evaluation. Now, we're saying the key recommendations or the key parts of the improvement plan, not everything, but the most important ones, should then be integrated within the APP of that particular department. So let's say there's an evaluation of detective services and there's certain recommendations there. Then the key recommendations, particularly those of a more strategic nature, should then then be integrated into the planning. The fragmentation of the planning system, inadequate alignment and coherence is also one of the gaps, and you will see, I'm sure, when our colleagues from DCOG speak about the district development model, we'll see that the one plans also points to one of the gaps in the planning system, in that provincial and national departments have not adequately disaggregated their plans within a particular district space. So that's a particular gap, and part of that is also about the inadequate spatial thinking, spatialization of planning at a national and provincial level. So there are various gaps. The collaboration across centre of governments, the collaboration with state-owned enterprises, and so on. So those are just some of the gaps that one could mention. The issue of is the integrated planning, has it been adopted? What we have been consulting, particularly with provinces and through SALGA and DCOG, over time on this particular policy framework, and it takes into account the existing policies and legislation that is applicable also at a municipal level. We also do have an implementation plan, which we will start implementing with effect from this particular quarter, so that it's not just another policy document that sits on the shelf, but it is actually then implemented. Honourable Member Mbele, yes, I think, you know, as you said, you've been part of the process, and I agree with most of what you have said, that you've had insight into the manner in which planning works. And we do work very closely with all the provincial governments, including the Western Cape. And we agree that there is considerable complexity in the system, but we feel that by unpacking the different processes and how the pieces fit together, we can certainly improve the contribution of the planning system to the achievement of our development outcomes. The issues of, and look, there's certain things that, there's certain issues that are not addressed through planning system alone. So let's take some issues of organizational culture, or bureaucratic inertia. Those are issues which cannot be addressed by the planning system alone. But certainly the planning system can assist very much in addressing the silo mentality, in supporting the cluster system around integrated planning, integrated implementation, and so on. The Honourable Member says he is skeptical that we can technocratically manage a system to make planning happen. I think we already have considerable, if you look at and I think, Honourable Mbele, you've had insight from a provincial perspective in terms of the manner in which all departments and public entities undertake planning. Now, that is often a technocratic process, and it has been happening. In our view, and it doesn't mean there are no bottlenecks, but part of our responsibility as public servants is precisely to help unblock those bottlenecks. So there are issues, and I think I've outlined some of them. I think the paradigm shift, I think what you are saying about the issue of facilitating optimal ecosystems, we are of the view with civic actors, business and community, that's exactly the position of this current government. And if you look at, even the whole idea of a social compact is very, very critical. And I think that government has long been speaking about this importance of, saying that it's not government alone that can achieve the objectives and the results that we are seeking to achieve. And that social compact operates at many different levels. So we shouldn't see it as simply operating only as one big national social compact. Yes, it is important that we do have one national social compact. We have bodies such as NEDLAC, which play a critical role in terms of driving those synergies. And we've seen, over time, how different sectors, whether it be the faith-based sector or business sector, has really come on board to help drive delivery to the benefit of the citizenry as a whole. So yes, I fully agree on the issue of collaboration with NGOs. And I think, if you look at different sectors, even if you look at something like the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide, it's definitely has to be a collaborative effort, and including, those who have resources beyond the public purse should also come to the party. The issue of and this question has been raised by a number of members, the relationship of this policy framework to the Intergovernmental Relations Framework Act. We are of the view that this policy framework, in fact, gives expression to the constitutional imperative of cooperative governance, and also very much complements the IGR Framework Act. And as I say, as DPME, we work very closely with DCOG in relation to promoting intergovernmental relations and collaboration, particularly within the planning space. The issue of the safety and security, you know, I think there's obviously, I think sometimes narrow political interests, and you'll excuse me, honorable members, but there are times when narrow political interests seem to override the interests of the citizenry. So, you know, that is something that needs to be looked at. And, you know, when we do our risk analysis, one of the issues that has been observed is that there has been a general political fragmentation, which in some instances tends to not necessarily serve the citizenry. But although, I mean, that it doesn't necessarily mean that, because you have countries where you have considerable political diversity, but there is then still collaboration towards the citizenry. Honorable Ntuli, the issue of the IGR Framework Act, I think that we have tried to elaborate on that, and you know, that occurs. So one of the overall areas of emphasis in the policy framework, and will also be in the implementation plan, is precisely around improving intergovernmental collaboration at all levels. So at a sectoral level, because there are few development outcomes that can be achieved by one sphere of government alone. So that is definitely something which we will focus on. Honorable Motsepe, the issue of thorough planning and avoiding chopping and changing, the approach that we tend to adopt is that we need to have an overall agreed strategy and a coherent strategy that is able to achieve sustained results, whilst at the same time having shifts, whether it be tactical shifts or adaptive management, corrective action based on the immediate results we are seeing. So the manner in which you are implementing a particular program or plan should be both agile and flexible, but also always towards achieving a sustained agenda. The issue of, we believe that this policy framework, if implemented effectively, will certainly assist in taking us closer to the improving the quality of life of citizenry. But I think we should also not see this as being a panacea, because there are still many areas of improvement that we need. So the issue of, this is a planning framework, and I think the issues of ensuring effective monitoring, accountability, iterative improvement towards development results is also critical to achieve development goals. Let me leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Mastola, can you fly to the agenda?
Okay, Chairperson. Is it visible, Chair?
Yeah, it's coming up. Yes. Thank you. Can I now invite the Deputy Minister Babela to make his opening address before the presentation by Copter? Honorable Babela.
Is he on? Is he connected? Chair? Or anyone from his team who can guide us whether he's here or not.
I'm checking that. I don't see him here.
Chair, with your permission.
Okay.
It's Avril Williamson speaking, the DG of DCOG.
Okay.
We have an apology from both our minister and from our deputy minister, not present in the meeting. So with your permission, I'm leading the team. And if you'll allow me to proceed.
Okay, you can proceed.
So thank you, Honorable Chairperson. And I also want to then greet all the honorable committee members and the deputy minister that's here this morning. Also want to greet all the colleagues from COPTA and from the DPME. And we want to thank the honorable committee members for the invitation and the opportunity for us to present the insights into how the district development model are being institutionalized and implemented in the 3 pilot sites of eThekwini, Our Tambo, and Waterberg
Mr.
district.
Khoza, can you mute your mic, please? You are disrupting the presentation now. Thank you. Sorry for that. You can continue.
Thank you, Chairperson. So we last made our appearance to this committee in November 2020. And at that time, we had actually focused on the objectives and principles of the district development model. So the initial discussions on crafting the joint implementation plan or path was then between the department and DPME at the time. So our presentation is a joint presentation between the department and DPME. We will highlight some valuable experiences and lessons gained from the 3 pilot sites. And we believe that these have put us on a good path and a firm foundation to actually then really strengthen the institutionalization of the district development model. So Chairperson, the person who will be presenting on behalf of the department is Mr. Ashley Losh. And if I could also just perhaps mention to the chair that I'm hoping that by the time the questions come, I will still be in a position to be in the meeting because we are also preparing for our oral responses later today. But I will do my best to remain throughout. But thank you so much, Chair. And with your permission, I'll hand over to him.
He can take the floor now.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. Good morning to you and good morning to the honorable members, the deputy ministers and colleagues from DCOG and DPME. With your permission, Chairperson, I will flight my presentation. I don't know if it's visible.
Yes, I can see it. District development model implementation overview from the 3 pilot sites.
Perfect.
That's what I see.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. And once again, good morning. I'm going to take you through the presentation as requested and as alluded to by my DG. Just to give you, as the DG also indicated, that we've had a combined presentation to this portfolio committee back in November 2020, but we also would want to then also a recap on the objectives and principles of the district development model, as well as the implementation approach as approved by Cabinet. Then we give you insights into the background of the 3 pilot sites. Then also highlight some key experiences gained in these 3 pilot sites, coupled with some lessons learned and the process that we've undertaken through an evaluation study, implementation evaluation study. Then highlight some critical success factors, and then there's focus a bit on some of the examples in relation to the DDM in action. And then as a way forward, we will then also outline some of the focus areas that we deem important in addressing some of the implementation challenges. So as the DG indicated, there was a joint presentation back in November 2020 to this committee, and it was just to give the committee an overview of the district development model. That was also focused on the role of the DPME in the DDM and the progress made since then. And then the DPME also focused on a specific case study in relation to the work in the Harry district, and a summary of the key recommendations that emanated from that presentation and from the committee itself was that the DPME continued to work together and work in formulating clear mechanisms for collaboration, as these 2 departments are seen as the key departments responsible for coordination and monitoring. A second recommendation was to continue to strengthen the center of government over and above the 2 departments, but also to include the Department of Public Service and Administration, but focusing on clarifying the expectations, the roles, responsibilities, and accountabilities to facilitate clear understanding and ownership of the DDM processes, and that is evolved quite significantly over time. And since the presentation to the committee, the DPME needs to play an active role in all the stages of the planning process, especially in relation to the development and rollout of the integrated 1 plans. And then lastly, the DPME as the oversight monitoring department is to use its departmental integrating monitoring framework as a mechanism to monitor implementation of the 1 plans. So moving forward, and this is giving a recap of the objectives and principles of the DDM. And I think we are all by now quite familiar with the intentions and objectives of the DDM. But just to recap and highlight some of these objectives and principles is that the DDM is a new integrated planning model for cooperative governance, which seeks to foster an integrated and district-based delivery approach. But the DDM, as much as it's focused on intergovernmental and integrated collaboration within district and metro spaces, the DDM validates local government as an epicenter for development and aims to address challenges. So the DDM in turn must also, apart from improving intergovernmental collaboration and cooperation, it also needs to have a net effect on improvements at the local government, institutionally, and on the service delivery level as well. So a recap of the overall objectives of the DDM is therefore then to address silos in the planning, budgeting, and implementation, which ties up to the earlier discussion on the first presentation, maximize impact and alignment, align plans as well as resources at our disposal through the development and implementation of integrated 1 district, 1 plan, and 1 budget plans, and narrow the distance between people and government by strengthening coordination roles and capacities at the district level. Another recap is on the approved DDM implementation approach. It suffices to say, Honourable Chairperson, this slide is just to indicate that we are following a phased approach towards the implementation and institutionalization of the DDM. So since 2019, we've had what we call the establishment phase, and that was really just to get the overall DDM framework and concept in place, and that moved over to the launching, the identification and launching of the DDM pilot sites, which we now all know are eThekwini Metropolitan Municipality in KZN, Waterberg District Municipality, Limpopo, and our Tambo District Municipality in the Eastern Cape. And where we are currently positioned and focused on is on the institutionalization of the DDM. And some of the key indicators there informing the successful implementation of this phase relates to the development of a DDM information management system. We need to have strengthened IGR structures that are aligned to the DDM objectives and principles. We are looking at developing a legal framework that will assist in the institutionalization and implementation of the DDM. And here we are using the development of regulations as envisaged under the Intergovernmental Relations Framework Act, but also key indicator and a milestone under this phase is really to get the one plans developed, adopted, and implemented in the what we call the 52 DDM spaces. And later in the presentation, we will touch more about on some of these milestones and the current position thereof. And then lastly, we talk about the sustainability phase going forward from 2025. But one underpinning and one issue that element that we need to emphasize and underscore here is that the DDM, the implementation and the institutionalization of the DDM is not a static process. It's an ever-evolving process based on experiences gained across the country. And therefore, it's critical and important for the department then to consider these experiences and lessons learned to refocus and reprioritize the indicators and the milestones under especially the institutionalization phase. So this is a constant process that we engage with as a department, obviously together with our national and provincial and local government partners. So when it comes to the role of COCTA, and we thought it necessary just to underscore again the precise role of COCTA within the DDM, and that is that the coordination of the DDM was assigned to the Minister of COCTA by the President, and therefore COCTA is expected to enable integrated planning and delivery in all district and metro spaces, but that goes hand in hand with the partnership and the work that we are doing with the DPME in terms of the DPME's role in setting the overall context and environment for development of a planning in the Republic, to mobilize all sectors of society to participate in the DDM and to coordinate the implementation of programs and projects in spaces within the DDM framework. And lastly, to produce regular reports of the implementation of the DDM in various districts and metros to various national, provincial and local government platforms. But what we also have done through our role as the lead coordinator of the implementation of the DDM is that under phase 2, that refers to the piloting of the DDM, we have appointed the Development Bank of Southern Africa as an implementing agent to assist in the rollout of the DDM in the 3 identified pilot sites. So this on the role of the DDM, of the DPME in the DDM, on a planning oversight function at the national provincial level, the DPME sets the framework for strategic plans and annual performance plans that guides the framework that guides the preparation of strategic plans and APPs of national and provincial departments. The DPME also incorporates requirements around the DDM with a framework and assess compliance of national and provincial plans with the DDM requirement. And lastly, on that level, the DPME also provides additional guidance where gaps are identified. The DPME at the DDM level have initiated, together with the presidency, the Presidential Steering Committee on the District Development Model, which is an interdepartmental steering committee. This committee is therefore chaired by the DPME and co-chaired by DCOG. And the purpose of this structure is to develop support packages in terms of the implementation and institutionalization of the DDM based on the experiences gained by COCTA, but also by other departments. So it works hand in glove with the work that COCTA is doing as the lead coordinator of the implementation of the DDM. As part of the institutionalization of the DDM, it's envisaged to establish what we call DDM technical support hubs, and this is focused on providing capacity building support to all of government in terms of the institutionalization of the DDM. So in a nutshell, the DDM hub is conceived as a functional network that will then provide support in terms of fostering intergovernmental planning, budgeting, and implementation in relation to a specific district or metropolitan space, but using the one plan as that particular framework on which this particular support is provided. Based on the lessons learned, which we will touch on later in the presentation from the 3 DDM pilot sites, where hubs are fully established, we have reconceptualized the DDM hubs establishment concept to be more practical and relevant to the geographical context and environment of respective district metros spaces. And what we are working towards now is the implementation of 2 options. The one is really to have a regional approach within the grouping cluster of 2 or more districts or metro spaces to fit under one DDM hub. And the second option in the revised DDM hub concept is to utilize current COCTA national, provincial, and district metro DDM support teams as DDM coordinators, who will then interact with national and provincial sector departments. So we have hubs, DDM hubs, technical support hubs in the 3 pilot sites, through which valuable insights and experiences were gained. And therefore, based on that, we as a department had to really look into how we establish hubs going forward across the country, but to make it more intergovernmental in nature. So coming back to the DDM pilot sites, as I indicated, Honorable Chairperson, the 3 pilot sites were identified and launched back in 2019. And it was launched by the Honorable President. And these were our Tamil district, eThekwini Metro, and Waterberg district, which is in Limpopo. And the criteria used to identify these pilot sites were among in keeping with a balanced approach to learn from both urban and rural contexts, as well as district and metropolitan areas. And these sites were selected because they face significant poverty and inequality challenges, but also have much potential and many opportunities that cut across the mining, agricultural, ports, and oceans economy sectors, and balance significant environmental and tourism factors. So collectively, these pilot sites contribute more than 10% to the GDP. That was back in 2019, and house more than 6 million people back in 2019 when these sites were identified. So it's important to also note that these sites are being used to test the DDM and the implementation and institutionalization of the DDM. But it's also focused on producing intergovernmental collaboration, resulting in unblocking priority implementation projects and the developing of one plans. So these sites have been very, very important, not just from a learning perspective, but also from a continued implementation perspective of the DDM in the other DDM sites and spaces across the country. So this is just a high level progress in the DDM pilot sites. So, Honorable Chairperson, we've identified four broad topics and themes that we wanted to provide progress against. The first is the DDM coordinating structures established, and currently these structures on both a political and a technical level have been established, especially in the eThekwini Metropolitan Municipality, and what we can also say in the Eastern Cape and Limpopo provinces. Stakeholders have opted, or the provinces have opted, to utilize existing IDR structures to politically oversee and technically support the implementation of the DDM in the Tambo and Waterberg districts. This approach has presented some challenges, as these existing structures have not been fully realigned and repurposed to the DDM imperatives. There are currently work done between COCTA and provincial COCTAs in the two provinces to improve and strengthen the functionality of those IGR structures and platforms. On the second topic relating to the DDM partnerships established, key partnerships to support the DDM implementation include, for example, with the United Nations, that focuses on unlocking economic value chains, social transformation, and service delivery enhancement. We also have partnerships with the Hollard Foundation Trust on early childhood development and the alignment of the facilitation of early childhood development in and incorporation of those in the one plans and further down into municipal IDPs. We have also partnership with the PPTI, private sector support, the NBI, mentorship for senior managers, and then lastly, as in the last example, with National Treasury City Support Program, where there's a number of support initiatives to the eThekwini municipality and the eThekwini region in particular. The third topic theme relates to the one plans developed. Final one plans were developed for all the three pilot sites. The DDM hubs facilitated the formal endorsement and approval of the one plans. by the municipalities and DDM and other IGR structures. We are working towards a joint program management approach towards the implementation of the one plans in the pilot sites. That will also involve all three spheres of government and key civil society and business stakeholders. We are working on an integrated monitoring innovation framework, which is quite advanced, and this is we're doing with the DPME colleagues as well. And this framework will be seen to better track development, impact, and service delivery across the 52 district and metropolitan spaces. As I indicated, as part of the integrated monitoring evaluation framework, we are also developing an integrated monitoring system for the DDM that will then ensure the automation of the one plan process, and its monitoring and reporting processes are streamlined and mainstreamed and hopefully simplified. Then lastly, the last topic relates to the catalytic intervention support and that are monitored as well. High impact catalytic projects have been identified in all the three pilots. In this presentation, Honorable Chair, we have 1 or 2 examples of those catalytic projects. The implementation of the existing and new catalytic projects are being supported and monitored by the DDM hubs as part of the one plan implementation process. So on the one plans for these 3 pilot sites, as I indicated, the one plans have been developed. Earlier this year, COCTA led an intergovernmental one plan quality assurance process through which a quality assurance panel was established. And it was pleasing to note and see that all the 3 one plans from these 3 pilot sites scored quite high. It was the one plans that scored the highest out of all the total number of one plans that have been assessed. So at the Queen scored 2.8 out of 3, 2.7 was scored for the Watambo one plan, and Waterberg one plan scored 2.7. So again, the hub facilitated the formal endorsement and approval of the one plans, as earlier alluded to, and meaning that these one plans were then also endorsed by the various municipalities, DDM and IGR structures. So in summary, when you want to look at the one plans for each of these pilot sites, this is the high level picture that we got from these one plans. And going forward, this would be the kind of information that in summary form we would want to see from all of the 52 to one plans, because this would then be important and it would inform the DDM IMS that we are in the process of developing as a monitoring tool, and to monitor the implementation of these intergovernmental commitments through these one plan. So Chair, I'm not going to go through all of through this information and detail. This was just for illustrative purpose to indicate that this is the kind of high level mirror picture that we would want to see from these one plans, and that can be broken down to the number of catalytic projects identified in the respective one plans, who are the project owners / the lead implementer. And this would then give one an insight into who are the departments or the agencies or the institutions that are actually driving key catalytic projects, and what the makeup of those catalytic projects are in terms of resource commitments and also then give us an indication of what is the status of each of these catalytic projects. There's some of the examples, high-level examples of the catalytic projects. This is one that has been identified in the Owatambo one plan, and here it gives a detailed description of the objectives, the scope and duration and owners of the project. But key here, Honorable Chair and committee members, is that we need to look at and we want to see what it would be the development impact of each of the catalytic projects. So here we can see for this project, which is the Eastern Cape Wild Coast, the rerouting of the N2 in that vicinity, where we can see that the development impact would be 300 current jobs, 335.6 million have been paid to 107 subcontractors out of a total of 1.6 billion rand. And then you can also then determine what would then be the long-term impact, in particular the socio-economic impact of the project. So this is a reflection that would be used for all of the catalytic projects in the one plans. Therefore, the one plans, the development of the one plans requires a very focused involvement of all sector departments and all government actors in order to get to this specific information and detail. This is just another example, or one of examples of the catalytic projects in the eThekwini municipality that sort of follows the same framework and logic, and this is the one for the Waterberg. So I'm not going to go through all of these examples. The members have received this presentation as well. So we thought it's important just to make some reflections on the catalytic project implementation in these pilot sites. So in Owatambo and Waterberg, all the catalytic projects are owned and implemented by various sector departments and state-owned entities, state-owned enterprises, as reflected in the previous slides. And therefore, as much as we have the DDM hubs in these three pilot sites driving the development of the one plans, they don't have direct influence over the implementation of the projects and rely on status information received from these lead sector departments and SOEs. And I can expand that to also include a COCTA, where COCTA is not the implementer of the identified catalytic projects, but that responsibility falls within the identified sector departments and SOEs. An interesting development in eThekwini is that all the catalytic projects identified for that region are managed by a dedicated catalytic project units, or CPU, that was established by the municipality. So that is a key and interesting development in that fund, where the municipality felt the need to take the lead in the, not the implementation of the catalytic projects, but take the lead in the monitoring of the implementation of those projects. And that the DDM hub is working quite closely with that particular unit in assisting in unblocking of any IGR and funding challenges that have been identified and that have been experienced in the implementation of some of these catalytic projects. Many identified catalytic projects are still in the pre-implementation phase, and this is only referencing or making reference to the DDM in the pilot sites. Due to lack of clear budget commitments by sector departments, the conceptualization, design, funding, implementation of new catalytic projects that will further support the realization of the Pilot 1 Plan's Vision 2050 should be facilitated at intersectoral and intergovernmental levels. These challenges have been identified through the quality assurance processes of the 1 plans, but also it resurfaced when we embarked on the on a implementation evaluation study that we have done with the Development Bank of Southern Africa as well. So the implementation evaluation study, as I indicated, we are doing with DPSA, was firstly to assess whether the DDM is being implemented as conceptualized, and then secondly, to consider any issues of potential misalignment between actual implementation and the intended outcomes of the DDM, and then lastly, to draw lessons and experiences and document case studies of emerging good practices in the 3 pilots. So those were the 3 primary objectives for undertaking this implementation study. Honorable Chairperson, I'm not going to go through all of the findings and lessons learned and recommendations that have been documented currently through this evaluation study. But if I can just hone into 1 or 2 under this and the findings, the study have come up with 6 key findings. One of which is that there's awareness and support across government spheres of the DDM. And I think this is important to underscore that there's now in the 3 pilot sites, there is a general acknowledgement and an understanding of the objectives and principles of the DDM. If you look at some of the lessons learned emanating from this evaluation study, one is that continuous learning is necessary for achievement of the objectives, and that the need for policy mechanism to achieve 1 budget, which means long-term financial planning to support the 1 plan, is critical. And this is where we are working quite closely with our DPME and National Treasury colleagues in setting and creating that specific policy mechanism and policy context. Some of the recommendations in the study has unearthed or come up with 10 recommendations. Some of it relates to the measures needs to be developed and implemented to strengthen intergovernmental relations, and that ties into the earlier discussion on the DPME presentation. That measures needs to be developed and implemented to ensure that all stakeholders perform their allocated roles and responsibilities, and this is also quite important when you look at the provincial level, the roles of provincial proctors and office of the premiers, and how the synergy is actually strengthened and found between the 2 stakeholders' responsibilities and roles. So where we are now with this evaluation study is that we've had an intergovernmental and interstakeholder workshop that took place on the 15th of September, and that was to finalize a management response and an improvement plan as provided for by the National Evaluation Policy Framework developed by DPME. Honorable Chairperson, where we are now at the moment, flowing from this workshop, which was quite well attended by national departments. We are busy finalizing the incorporation of the outcomes of that workshop into the draft management response and improvement plan before it then gets finalized, hopefully by the end of this month. That would then set the framework for actioning and taking forward the lessons coming from this evaluation study. Important to emphasize some of the critical success factors for the successful implementation and institutionalization of the DDM. One, and I think this is also flowing from the earlier conversation and presentation by our DPME colleagues, is that DDM needs to be fully integrated into existing planning system, and that it's not seen as a standalone a process or an approach. Whilst DCOG has an overall responsibility for the implementation of the DDM, it's critical that departments across national and provincial spheres work together and guide the implementation of the DDM as an all-of-government reform approach and imperative. It's also important to note that achieving the DDM's policy objectives requires utilizing and improving existing systems of government. DDM implementation should strengthen and promote better coordination and alignment at various levels, ensuring involvement and participation from beyond government through a clear strategy for the private sector, civil society, traditional leadership, and other partners. Another critical success factor is that ensuring that technical capabilities and expertise are deployed to district or local level to address challenges in a particular space. Focus on implementation through entering protocols across the three levels of government in a designated spatial area, i.e. the one plans, intergovernmental one plans that are seen as intergovernmental protocols, and last, improvements to capital investment and expenditure frameworks needs to be used to ensure long-term funding streams. So this is some of the high-level critical success factors which are still relevant today. When it comes to the DDM in action, this is some of the practical examples over and above the experiences gained in the 3 pilot sites. We have seen the president undertaking a number of DDM measures. We've to date have had 4 in 4 different provinces, and this is really just to assess the progress that is made in terms of the implementation of the DDM. The intention is then and expectation is then to have further presidential measures in other districts, metros, and provinces. We also cite the Eastern Seaboard development as an example of DDM in action. And I think the next slide will talk a bit more about what is the current status and achievements of the Eastern Seaboard. But suffice to say that the region has been declared as a development region by the Minister of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, which then sets the legal framework and a legal basis for work to be undertaken within this region. And then we list also the Community Works Program, Agrarian Revolution Program, which fits within the vision of Chapter 6 of the National Development Plan, which talks about an integrated and inclusive rural economy. Currently, we have 36 projects funded by COGTA in 7 provinces, and we list the provinces there. And it's also to indicate that some of the projects have been concluded in the 2019-20 financial year, and others are destined to be completed in this financial year. This is just some of the progress made in the Eastern Seaboard development project, where we have under phase 1 Eastern Seaboard Regional Spatial Development Framework Inception report had been completed. It was declared as a development region as well, as I alluded to. Status quo research report was completed. Under phase 3, regional situation analysis and synthesis report done and is under consultation. Stakeholder management and communication strategy done. Eastern Seaboard marketing and communication strategy and website done. Lastly, engagement with stakeholders and identified structures are ongoing. When we look at the link between the outcomes of the local government summit that was recently held by our honorable minister, and how that contributes towards the coherent local government support plan and supporting the improvement and strengthening of local government performance. One of the resolutions emanating from a summit focused on the joint finalization of the one plans, the DDM1 plans and one budget per district municipality. The next resolution focused on the incorporation of the climate change matters in the DDM in one plans, undertake DDM roadshows and ensure greater participation of SWEs and political champions at local government, especially in municipalities, and provide monthly reports indicating support provided to municipality as per section 154 of the Constitution. All of this relates to the continued institutionalization and implementation of the DDM, specifically on the one plan, but Honorable Chairperson and Honorable Members, this also needs to feed into and contribute to an overall consolidated approach or a report to improving local government performance as directed by Cabinet back in August. So lastly, and in conclusion, Chairperson, Honorable Chairperson, Honorable Members, this is a summary of the key areas and themes that we consider important towards addressing the institutionalization implementation challenges of the DDM. And this is very much also informed by the key findings, lessons learned, and recommendations made in the COCTA DDM implementation in the relation study. The first theme relates to the institutionalization of the DDM. And here, as I indicated earlier on, setting the legal framework for the institutionalization of the DDM is important. And here we're looking at gazetting through our minister, section 47(1)(b) of the Intergovernmental Relations Framework Act. We will then gazette those regulations that will set out a framework for the institutional mechanisms for DDM across the three spheres of government, inclusive of civil society and private sector and other non-state actors. But it will also give a legal context and a legal framework for the development of the intergovernmental one plans, and making a clear determination that these one plans will be seen as intergovernmental implementation protocols. Another action or area of focus would be the introduction and institutionalization implementation of the DDM technical support hubs, as experiences have taught us in the 3 pilot sites that these are critical levers and mechanisms in improving capacities, not just at the local government level, local government meaning district and municipal level, metro level, but also across the 3 spheres of government, pertaining to improving intergovernmental planning and intergovernmental budgeting. We are in the process of finalizing the DDM implementation evaluation study, as alluded to earlier on, through the finalization of the management response and implementation plan. Then we will continue providing support to provinces and departments with the institutionalization of the DDM. A particular focus here is on improving and strengthening the DDM IGR structures and platforms across the three spheres of government, but then also the development and implementation of one plan. We will continue providing support to the DDM political champions and to directors general to strengthen the intergovernmental coordination roles in their respective DDM districts and metros. The second area of focus is the implementation of one plans, support the review and updating of the one plans. These include the three pilot sites and the 49 district and metro spaces. We are, Honorable Chairperson, Honorable Committee members, we are in the process of a review and updating of the one plans across the country. The department has issued circulars and frameworks guiding provinces and stakeholders in the review and updating of these one plans. It's expected that the review and updated one plans would be finalized by mid-December this year, based on the circulars and guidelines and frameworks that has been issued by the department. It's also important to note that the review and update of the one plans also flows from the findings of the quality assurance panel for each of the one plans, where this panel has made certain recommendations and considerations for how the respective one plans could be improved. So those findings and recommendations are also taken into this process. Tracking of commitments made by national sector departments and provincial sector departments within the context of the DDM. And this is a joint approach between the DCOC and the DPME. And we see this is a real practical action flowing from the November 2020 recommendations from this committee. Then lastly, the monitoring and evaluation aspect, where we are working with DPME on the localization of the medium-term strategic framework for the period 2019 to 2024, where we would want to bring in some of the objectives and principles relating to the DDM, joint support towards the establishment and management of the DDM information management system, establishment of the monitoring framework for the implementation of the DDM, and then lastly, Honorable Chairperson, joint assessment of data on the planning and implementation of infrastructure development projects within districts and assessing the facilitative and hindering factors that frame these projects. Coupled with all of these areas, it's important to note that the Department of Cooperative Governance have completed the organizational review process to align its strategic priorities, provincial and municipal support processes and approaches with the objectives and principles of the DDM. So the DDM and taking cognizance of the COCTA's overall coordination role within the DDM has now been fully incorporated into the organizational structure and organizational process and the processes of the department. So thank you, Honorable Chairperson and Honorable Committee members, for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. The presentation is now open for discussion. Can I see members who want to? Honorable Kibi, Honorable Mbele.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Thanks to the presenter from COCTA for the presentation. Chair, I have a few questions to COCTA. Honorable Chair, I just want to get clarity from the presenter, from COGTA. In their supplementary presentation information, you have made mention that there is a lack of participation of sector departments in the one plan development process, which was referred to as minimal. Can you please elaborate which departments are not participating in the DDM and why are they not participating? My next one, what kind of interventions were explored to ensure catalytic projects are taken seriously by all role players in the DDM? The next one is, what interventions has been put in place to ensure better coordination of catalytic projects, especially with regard to provision of bulk infrastructure and budget allocations? And my last one is, the department mentioned that the departmental integrated monitoring framework will be used as a mechanism to monitor implementation on the one plans. Is the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation the only department to monitor the implementation of the DDM? And what will be the role of departmental monitoring and evaluation units across the public service in monitoring the implementation of the DDM? And there's a set of indicators for the integrated monitoring framework developed to measure performance of model across all the 52 districts in order to ensure uniformity. How often will they be reporting on the expected deliverables of the DDM? I thank you, Honorable Chair.
Honorable Mpele.
Ngiyabonga Stralafoot, and thank you very much for the presentation. Let me just preface my inputs and my questions by saying that the intention is not at all to undermine or negate the work and the efforts of the officials who've been parts of developing and driving all of these processes and systems, because I know that they are simply the policy implementers and not the initiators. But obviously as MPs, we have to do our own sort of vigorous oversights and scrutiny as part of the oversight mandates. So Chair, if my feeling and impression from the previous DPME presentation was, as I said, one of skepticism, then my feeling and response and impression of the COGTA one is, I have to say, one of kind of sheer panic and confusion, because it kind of looks and sounds like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic while the ship is sinking. And I'm really struggling to see the sort of clear, concrete and unique value adds and the practicality or feasibility from what we've heard. And, you know, again, with great respect, I don't want to impugn the merits and you know, sort of the work of those involved, but it really sounds like an exercise in trying to herd cats, as Honorable Gibi sort of referred to. There's partial involvements, non-involvements, and it sounds like a lot of moving cogs in a machine that's not quite together. So I'd like to ground my two questions in the one pilot sites, the eThekwini Metro, if only because it's my hometown where I was born. Is that we've seen in recent times in the media about certain infrastructural and service delivery huge failures in the metro, whether it's about the sewage treatment systems not being maintained, breaking down, refuse flowing into rivers, into the beaches. Now the beaches are closed because they're not safe for people to use. how and where does the DDM align, sync with, harmonize, and assist that? Because my thing is, if you're not dealing with the concrete real-time issues and challenges on the ground, then you're not helping, quite frankly, So we need to see these things coming together to deal with the challenges and issues. And I'll happily accept that it may be early stages, things are in process, and there's a clarity that I can be given. But that's the first thing that comes to mind for me is what's the value add? Are we solving problems as opposed to pushing papers, And secondly, coming from the presidency and DPME angle, what I didn't hear, and maybe it can come through in the responses, where is the harmonization with Operation Vulindlela, right? This is supposed to be the big, this talks about the one plan. The big plan is meant to be Operation Vulindlela and the reforms that it's meant to be spearheading and driving in order to catalyze economic growth and so on and so forth. So whether it's the reforms that the president's announced referring to a freight rail, ports and harbors, is that part of the discussion on the agenda in the system when we talk about the DDM, or not? Because obviously, as I said, if this is not linked to other initiatives, other discussions, and it's not addressing the challenges in real time on the ground, then it's kind of boxing shadows and sort of hot air. Thanks, Chair. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Honorable Mpele. Honorable Motsepe.
Thank you very much, my Honorable Chairperson. I've got only one concern. Which criteria was used to prioritize the province in terms of DDM? And what is the reason to exclude others? Because these three spheres must work simultaneously. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Motsepe. I see no further hands now. Can I invite the department to respond to questions raised thus far?
Chairperson, I don't know if my DG is still on the platform. If there's other DCOC colleagues, but I can give a stab at it and respond to the points raised by the honourable members.
As I said, I'm not privy to selecting who must respond.
No, I can go then. And the
as
DG
long as the department is responding to questions raised.
Perfect. Now then I will go, Chairperson. Thanks to the honourable members for the comments and the questions. So if I take the first set of comments and questions raised by Honourable Member Kibi, there have been a number of support initiatives undertaken by the department in particular in firstly, and what I call spreading the message of DDM to all departments. So that has been done through various engagements and presentations at various intergovernmental platforms, whether it's departmental min-max or technical min-max or other intergovernmental structures such as technical foresight or foresight. But we've also worked through our ministry and in engaging the various ministers and deputy ministers on understanding the DDM concept, the objectives and purpose, and how to institutionalize the DDM within their respective departments. So those from our side work some of the initiatives. In very specific cases, we've actually had a much more hands-on support approach to select a number of national departments where we have worked with these departments in building in DDM objectives and principles into, for example, their annual performance plans and other strategic frameworks and other plans. So this was one part of our approach to getting to the point where we get sector departments to firstly understand the intention, objectives, and vision of the DDM, but then also to directly support them and assist them in ensuring that they do participate in the various DDM IGR structures at the district metro level, but also at a provincial level. The same applies to the work that we've done with the various provincial OTPs and provincial COCTAs, where we've actually, through, and I've indicated in my last slide, that the department have reorganized itself to be more focused on providing a proper DDM support to the provinces and to districts and metros through, for example, the establishment of what we call provincial support teams. So we have teams, COCTA teams, that provide the technical guidance and technical support to their respective provinces, and of course to the various districts and metros in those provinces, to ensure that there's an understanding, there's a common understanding of the DDM, but also to provide the support in strengthening those various DDM structures. So this is what we've done over the recent couple of months, and it's starting to bear fruits. Where, for example, one or two departments that I've personally engaged with really started to embrace the DDM and started to think through how to incorporate DDM in their various strategic plans and processes, etc. So there has been a shift, there has been a move, and it's a gradual shift and it's a gradual move to getting sector departments much more involved in the DDM processes, the provincial level and at the respective district and metro level. There's other initiatives as well. Through the Presidential DDM Steering Committee that is chaired by the DPME and co-chaired by COCTA, where we also have work streams, several work streams that are looking at, in general, how to then use various topics in supporting departments and strengthening them, the DDM contribution and the DDM institutionalization within those various topics. So this is also part of the interventions in getting commitments from sector departments into the one plans. And this is what makes the review and updating of one plans so critical, that as we are in that process, in that phase of reviewing and updating one plans, the lessons learned and experiences gained from the previous one plan development and formulation processes are now being responded to and are addressed. So as a department, we are using these approaches to also ensure that sector departments are not just only participating through the various DDM IGR structures, but that we also get to a point where we get full commitments from these departments. And what I've glanced from the preliminary sentiment and views from the current review and updating of one plans process, that is starting to bear fruit. Departments are coming to the party. They are literally also engaging in the structures, but also making full commitments where required and where we need it. So there is this interventions and support initiatives and processes in getting to the point where we can say we have full sector involvement and participation and commitments. It will take time. I think one of the honorable members do indicate that this is still also as much as we're following a phased approach to the institutionalization and implementation of DDM, this is still also a learning experience for all of us. So all the departments across the 3 spheres of government and stakeholders have to date contributed and provided insights into the DDM integrated monitoring system. So it's not a cocktail or DPME product alone. We've had several exchanges and engagements across the 3 spheres of government in putting this system and framework together. As we speak at the moment, final tweaks and updates are still being made to the system, so we don't have a finalized system as yet, but suffice to say that at the end of the day, all of government will be responsible for monitoring the implementation of the DDM through the implementation of the one plan. So the system is designed and will be designed in such a way that would provide all of government stakeholders to actually input and contribute to the monitoring of the one plan. Hence, the process of having had intergovernmental engagements in putting the system together was so critical. So we're looking at, so they contributed to the development of a set of indicators, which, as I indicated, are being refined and retweaked as we get more inputs and insights from our various stakeholders. But at the end of the day, we will have a set of well-informed and well-developed indicators that will then be used as a monitoring platform by all of government. It is hoped that the implementation of the DDM be monitored on a quarterly basis, culminating into quarterly reports, but also annual reports, using that system, using that set of indicators. So that is in regard to the frequency of the reporting and the frequency of monitoring of the implementation of the DDM. The Itaquini case is a case in point. It's a unique case as well, where in fact we have been able to bring the development, the DDM vision and objectives in line with what is required in the governmentally in real time. So the DDM, as I also indicated in the presentation, and the Itaquini case was a very good test case and still a very good test case, where we've managed to bring what is required on hand into the DDM frameworks. So there's no disjuncture between what would be in a one plan and what is required in terms of immediate support and interventions in that space. A case in point, is the disaster relief, the management of the disaster relief initiatives, where COCTA, through the DDM approach, established intergovernmental platforms and structures at both a technical and political level that was then used to bring all of government together and key stakeholders and partners together to actually action some of the disaster relief responses and plans and approaches. So that is one example where we tie the DDM together with real-time support and support initiatives. But it's also important to note, which was not in this presentation, that the DDM and the one plan in the different district and metro spaces needs to be informed by the various programs, strategies, approaches that are out there. So the one plan is not developed in isolation of all of these initiatives, whether it's at the national level, priority level, or the provincial level, or at the local government level. It needs to be translated into the one plan framework. An practical example, since we're on the eThekwini case, is the port decongestion initiative that is happening in eThekwini. That is a strategic intergovernmental project that has been identified by national government and that found its way into the one plan, is expressed in the one plan, to ensure that the intergovernmental commitments and responsibilities are clearly defined and tied up in the one plan. So this is just one example of how current day practical approaches, projects, and programs have been incorporated into a one plan. So we make it clear to departments and sector departments that those kind of initiatives and programs and projects would be deemed important to include in a one plan framework, in a one plan context. So the criteria for the provinces, as much as we focus on the 3 pilot programs or pilot sites, there is actions and initiatives in place to roll out the DDM across the country. So DDM is not just confined to the 3 provinces or the 3 pilot sites. The 3 pilot sites were identified back in 2019 using the set of criteria that was outlined in the presentation. And by extension, the 3 provinces, but the rollout of and implementation of the DDM is done outside of those 3 pilot sites as well, broader than those 3 pilot sites as well, on a country level. Honorable Chair, I see my colleague, Mr. Rabotata's hand is up. I think we can give him an opportunity to also add. Thank you.
Okay, you can take the floor, Mr. Rabotata.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. Let me also extend my greetings to all the honorable members of the committee and my colleagues that are in the platform. Chair, I thought I should cover one issue that my colleague Skanosh has not dealt with. This issue is raised by Honorable Mayor, and he asks, what is the unique value that the DDM is going to add I thought we should indicate that for the first time through the DDM, all three spheres of government, including private sector that operates in this 52 district and metro spaces, will have a common understanding of the challenges that are at play in this district and metro spaces. And this common understanding will then inform the development of one plans that we referred to in the presentation. Now, these one plans are intergovernmental plans jointly developed by the three spheres of government for a particular district or metro space. So for the first time, the three spheres of government, including civil society and the private sector operating in these spaces, come together to put together a commonly agreed plan. Secondly, it is our view that the introduction of the district development model would practicalize intergovernmental relations in the country in the following manner. It will facilitate integrated planning. It will also facilitate integrated budgeting. And it will also facilitate integrated implementation in this district and metro spaces. And all of these things are going to be will be reflected in the one plans that that we referred to in the presentation. So, Chair, I thought I should just add that, just to demonstrate the value that the district development model will add in terms of how government plans, how government budgets, and how government implements its programs and projects in the identified district and metro spaces. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mascole, are there no set of minutes that we need to deal with?
No, Chair, next week.
Okay, thank you. Let me thank the Deputy Minister, the presenters representing both departments for the work well done in this committee meeting. Unfortunately, we have now come to the end of the meeting, and the meeting is thus adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Adios, 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 amigo.
Thank you.
Adios.
Thank you, my Honorable Chair.
Recording stopped.